My name's Jane, and this happened almost 10 years ago, when I was 26. It was a rough patch in my life, and this was probably the roughest part of it. I had gotten out of a really bad relationship, and I didn't have a place to live. I couldn't afford anything too fancy. In fact, I couldn't even afford anything decent, not on my own anyway. So I turned to Craigslist for some options. It wasn't long before I found a post for a room for rent in the city. The pictures looked decent, and the price was right, so I arranged a viewing with the person who posted the ad. The poster was a woman named Allison. She was 30 years old and worked in the city like me. It seemed like a good fit on paper. When I arrived at the apartment, I was met by Allison, the current tenant and my would-be roommate. She was friendly and showed me around the place. The apartment was a decent size, and the room was spacious enough for me. It was clean and tidy. The building was pretty run down, but the apartment was nicely renovated. It actually had the feel of a luxury condo, but you wouldn't know it from the outside. The rent was affordable, and the location was perfect for my job. I decided to take the room. I moved in the following day after work. I had been crashing on a friend's couch at the time, so I was eager to move in. The first few weeks were great. Allison was an excellent roommate, and was always up for a chat. We had a lot in common, and quickly became good friends. However, things started to get a little weird when Allison's boyfriend Matt started showing up more frequently. At first I didn't think anything of it. He was friendly, and we would chat from time to time. After a while though, I started to notice that he would flirt with me when Allison wasn't around. It made me uncomfortable, and I tried to distance myself from him. I considered talking to Allison about it. Maybe she could help. I decided against it though, because I was hoping it was nothing. One night, when Allison was out with friends, Matt came over to the apartment. I was watching TV in the living room when he came in and sat down next to me. He started making small talk, and then he leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. I pushed him away and told him to leave me alone. He got up and went to Allison's room. Another time in the morning, I was in the kitchen cooking breakfast. He came in and started flirting with me again. Suddenly, Allison walked in the door and saw what was happening. She was furious and started screaming at Matt. Then she turned her attention to me and accused me of leading him on. I was stunned and didn't know what to say. Before I could react, Allison lunged at me and we started fighting. I tried to defend myself, but I was no match for her. Eventually, we were both exhausted, and Matt pulled us apart. I was hurt and bleeding, and Allison was seething with anger. Matt suggested that we go to the hospital and get checked out, and we all piled into the car. It was an awkward drive, and no one spoke a single word. At the hospital, we were seen by the doctor who examined us both. Allison had a few scratches, but I had a black eye, a split lip, and a bump on my head. The doctor asked what happened, but we lied and said that we fell. I was afraid that the police would get involved if we told the truth. There was no doubt that the doctor knew we were full of crap, but he didn't press further. After we left the hospital, Allison and I didn't talk much. The tension in the air was thick, and I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. The next day, I packed my bags and moved out. I didn't want to cause any more trouble, and I needed to put that whole incident behind me. I realized I should have been more cautious. I should have been more aware of Matt's behavior, and I should have said something to Allison sooner. I now have my own place, and I'm working through my emotions with a therapist. The incident with Allison and Matt will always be part of my past, but it's over, and I've moved past it. I was trying to sell my old car a few years ago. It was an older Honda, but it still ran pretty well. I put an ad up on Craigslist with some pictures and information about the car. It sat there for a few days, but finally I got a response from a guy named Daryl. He seemed to be interested in the car, and said that he wanted to do a test drive. I agreed to meet him at a mall parking lot the next day. That morning, I woke up early. I made sure the car was clean and that it was running smoothly. When I arrived at the mall, I saw a big guy standing next to a black SUV. He was wearing a leather jacket and had a thick beard. I assumed it was Daryl, and I walked over to introduce myself. "Hey, I'm James. You must be Daryl."
"Yeah, that's me,"
he said, giving me a nod.
"This is my friend Mike. He's here to help me out."
Daryl had brought a friend with him. He was even bigger than Daryl, with tattoos all over his arms. I felt really vulnerable with those two big guys, but I handed the keys over to Daryl anyway.
"Let's take her for a spin,"
he said, gesturing for me to follow him. We got into the car, with Daryl driving and Mike in the back seat. As soon as we started driving, I could tell that something was off. Daryl was driving too fast, and he was really reckless, swerving in and out of lanes and ignoring stop signs. I asked him to slow down, but he just laughed it off and kept driving. After a few minutes, we pulled off the main road onto a dirt path. I was pretty panicked on the inside, but I tried to stay calm. "What's up? Where are we going?" I asked.
"Don't worry, man. We're just taking a detour. I want to show my friend what the car can do on some rough terrain,"
Daryl replied in an annoyed tone. It was like I was ruining his fun. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I thought of being held captive, or worse. These two guys were way bigger than me, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I was at their mercy. I asked a few more times where we were going, but Daryl just seemed to get more and more annoyed every time. I thought about making some excuse to get out of there, but I didn't think it would help. It was really clear to me that I was trapped in a bad place, and we just kept getting farther and farther away from civilization. I knew I had to do something before it was too late, so I waited for a moment when Daryl was distracted, and then I opened the door and jumped out of the car. I stumbled onto the ground and fell. When I looked up, the car's brake lights were on. I turned and sprinted into a nearby forest. I ran as fast as I could, dodging trees and bushes as I made my way deeper into the woods. I could hear those two guys shouting and cursing behind me, but I didn't stop. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stop. After I ran for a while, at least half an hour, I emerged from the woods and saw a gas station in the distance. I ran towards it, grasping for air and covered in sweat. I burst through the door, and the cashier looked up at me. Her jaw dropped. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I need to call the police. Please, can you help me?" I replied, stumbling over my words. The cashier called the police, and when they got there, I gave them a detailed description of Daryl and his friend, and I showed them where we had been. The police searched the area, but they never found the men or my car. I couldn't believe that I'd narrowly escaped what could have been a really terrible fate. I had always thought that I was a smart and cautious person, but I let my guard down and trusted the wrong people. To this day, I still don't know what Daryl and his friend had planned for me. Maybe they were just trying to scare me, or maybe they had something more sinister in mind. But I'm grateful that I was able to escape before things got worse. As for my car, it was never found. The police told me that it was likely taken to a chop shop and dismantled for parts. It was a tough pill to swallow, but I knew I had to move on. I eventually bought a new car, a silver Toyota Corolla that I still drive to this day. If I ever decide to sell it, I'm not sure what I'll do. I'll probably just post it on Craigslist. This happened late last summer. I had a dirt bike that I barely used. It was only a few months old at the time, and it was pretty much in perfect condition. It was a tough decision, but I needed the money for some bills that had piled up. I put it up on Craigslist for a really decent price, so I wouldn't have to waste a lot of time finding a buyer. The ad got tons of replies right away, and within a day, I had a possible buyer coming to look at it. His name was Austin, and he seemed like a decent guy. We'd exchanged a few emails, and he agreed to come over and take a look at the bike. He arrived on time, and we took the bike for a quick spin around the block. He seemed happy with it, and handed me the cash. I thought that would be the end of it. I was a little disappointed that I had to get rid of it, and I didn't sell it for near what I paid. After a few days, Austin called me and told me that the bike had some problems. He said that it was making strange noises and that the brakes were failing. I was surprised to hear that since the bike was running perfectly fine when I sold it to him. It was in excellent condition before I gave it to him, so I figured if anything was wrong, then it must have happened after the sale. Austin kept calling me every day and demanding that I give him his money back. He threatened to leave bad reviews about me online and take legal action against me. I was starting to get worried, even though I knew that I did nothing wrong. I agreed to meet with him to take a look at the bike. I had already spent the money though, so I don't really know what I could do about it anyway. We met at a spot where a lot of people ride bikes. When I arrived, he was waiting for me outside. He looked angry, and I could tell he was still upset. We walked over to where the bike was parked, and I asked him to show me what was wrong. As soon as I saw it, I could tell that the bike had seen some more use. It was dirty, and there seemed to be some damage to the frame. I knew I hadn't done any of that, so I was pretty sure Austin had crashed it and wanted me to pay for it. I humored him though, and asked him to show me what was wrong. Austin got on the bike and revved the engine. It did sound a little off. He rode it around the block and came back, complaining about the brakes. I checked them myself, and they seemed messed up. I told Austin that he clearly did some damage to it. He accused me of lying and demanded his money back. I refused again, and we started arguing. Things escalated quickly, and before I knew it, Austin was pushing me. I stumbled back and fell to the ground. He walked over towards me as I lifted my arms up in self-defense. Suddenly, he turned around and backed off. I looked behind me and saw a group of guys approaching. I didn't know them, but I figured they must have scared him off. I scurried to my feet and ran to my car. Austin was still standing next to his truck, but he didn't look at me. I was really scared to be honest, so I drove away, and I didn't look back. I thought it would stop after that, but it didn't. Austin kept calling me and begging for his money back. After what happened last time, there was no way I was meeting with him again. The calls continued and I wasn't answering, but eventually I decided to pick up the phone. I told Austin that if he didn't leave me alone, then I was pressing charges for assault. I was mostly bluffing, to be honest, because I had no idea how to contact those other guys as witnesses. Without them, it would have just been my word against his. It seemed to work though. He must have been scared enough by the threat, and I didn't hear from him again. I was really worried for a while after that, because he knew where I lived. He seemed really crazy, and I wouldn't have been surprised if I saw him show up. That didn't happen though. I did notice that Austin had posted negative reviews about me online, and was spreading lies about what happened. I came across an ad on Craigslist that was basically smearing me as a scammer. I didn't care though, because I had no intention of meeting anyone on there again. I had a really horrible experience about 2 years ago. I had been living with my two friends Mark and Jeff for over a year in an apartment in the heart of the city. We were all in our early 20s and life was good. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and our designated spaces within our humble abode. However, Jeff got a job across the country, and he went ahead and found someone to take over his room on Craigslist. Mark and I didn't meet the guy beforehand, because we were both really busy with work. Jeff, on the other hand, had some time off before he started his new job, so he did all the work to find someone. Our new roommate was Ben. He was in his 40s, which was a bit of a red flag for us, but we trusted Jeff to find someone. He was quiet and reserved, and he had a steady job. I was really hoping to find a new friend, but maybe this would work anyway. At first, everything was fine. Ben stayed in his room most of the time, which was a bit strange. He would always be home when I left in the morning, and he would be there when I got back. I started to suspect that he wasn't going to work. We simply took his word for it when he said he had a job. I started to think that he was lying. He paid his rent on time though, and he didn't make any noise. However, as time went on, we started to notice things missing around the apartment. It started with small things like food, but it soon escalated to larger items. Mark had a gold chain that went missing, and one of my favorite pairs of shoes was gone. That one really didn't make sense, because I would never lose them. Mark and I both suspected Ben, but we didn't want to jump to any conclusions. We decided to keep an eye on things and wait for more evidence before accusing him of anything. One night, Mark told me that he saw Ben coming out of my room. That was enough evidence for me. We knew we had to confront Ben about this, so we knocked on his door and asked him to come out. When we asked him about the missing items, he became defensive and denied taking anything. Mark and I exchanged glances, unsure of what to do next. We knew it was Ben taking things, but we couldn't prove it outright. Looking back, I know it was useless to try to reason with him. Why would he admit it anyway? We pressed the issue for a minute or two, then he became aggressive, shouting and cursing at us. We tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. Before we knew it, he came at us throwing punches. We struggled for 30 seconds or so, but there were two of us, so Mark and I managed to overpower him. But it was clear that things were out of control. We eventually let him up. He stormed into his room and slammed the door. Then we called the police. As soon as they arrived, Ben was taken into custody. We were relieved, and we knew we couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. For the next few days, Mark and I stayed with friends. We had to figure out our next move. The police couldn't press charges on Ben for some reason, and he was released. To add to that, we weren't even able to kick him out of the apartment. It's crazy how difficult it is to evict a roommate where we live. We talked to the landlord about breaking our lease, and thankfully, he was understanding. It took a few weeks, but Mark and I eventually found a basement apartment for the two of us in a different part of the city. It wasn't as nice as our old place, but it was safe, and that's the most important thing. We never found out what happened with Ben at that old place. I imagine our old landlord had to evict him, because I'm pretty sure he wasn't even working. We talked to Jeff after that. Mark and I were pretty mad at him, because it seemed like he just chose the first crazy guy off Craigslist to live with us. Like he just wanted to get someone, and didn't care who. He was moving out after all. He owned up to the mistake, and we did forgive him. It was a crazy experience, but no one really got hurt,